Hello. Our story begins inside the Geonosian arena, during the conflict that started the Clone War. General Grievous had not been activated, but he watched from inside the caverns as the Jedi fought heroically. His eyes narrowed on victorious individuals, masters or knights that held their own against the seemingly insurmountable odds. He paced along the slits in the walls, watching different Jedi with each new view change. The droid general was recently transformed into this abomination, a decision he agreed to. After the Jedi and Republic attempted to assassinate him, it was the Sith who saved him. These shadowy cultists gave him his new armor and prepared him for his war against the Republic. Grievous was given some training by Count Dooku, and today was simply an observation day. His clawed feet dug into the sand and dirt beneath him, and his arms crossed behind his back. Ever since his transformation, things hadn't been the same. Grievous felt lackluster, as if a part of him was missing. His organs were really the only part of him from his original body still intact, but this was something else entirely. He acknowledged that not all things would be the same after his accident, but this wasn't within his body or at his body. Grievous felt a tingling sensation within his fingers. It had been felt ever since he came online as this new creature, as Grievous. Every time he requested a diagnosis for the problem, nothing changed. Medical droids would examine his body and come to no new conclusions. Grievous, as a result, thought nothing of it, and trained with the new sensation anyways, believing it to be a part of his new life, when in reality, it was a calling, an awakening. See, something Grievous didn't know about his crash was the truth. In all fairness to the Sith, they didn't know either. Grievous died fully in his crash. His soul left the mortal realm and transcended into the Force, but there was a change. He didn't let go. He latched on as most don't. A darkness, a rage that lived within him his entire life started to bubble up within him in that moment. As he died, he was embraced by the Force itself. He was resurrected by the will of the Force and the will of his mind. Grievous, nor the Sith, nor the medical droids knew this truth about him. They simply believed that he had survived, as had been intended. The Force, though, was extremely limited following his survival. Like Darth Maul a galaxy away on Lothal Minor, Grievous survived the dark side of the Force. It was his awakening, his connection. Here inside the Geonosian arena, he watched people die, and he reveled in their suffering. Every Jedi killed before him brought him enjoyment, and the tingling within his fingers grew. He was connecting through the Force. Truthfully, Grievous was closer to a wound in the Force than anything else. He wasn't created in the same way that Nihilus was thousands of years before, but his body was damaged beyond physical repair, without the robotic enhancements. It's also the reason that despite his new frame, he had the potential to access the Force in ways that a typical being might not in this form. Where a typical wound in the Force would be caused by a death of many, this was the death of a singular individual. Darth Plagueis the Wise, had he been given more time to live and learn, would have discovered that this was possible, and Grievous was a 1 in a billion chance of it becoming a reality. But with its awakening came the need for learning. Grievous may have enjoyed watching people die, and then seeing the clones attack, but he didn't know that he possessed a unique grip on the Force. The Sith never sensed it, because of how dormant he was when they picked him up following his crash. Now he wandered through the catacombs, without anyone, alone with his thoughts. His shuttle was waiting for him anyways, but he finally realized how intense the sensation emanating from his fingers was. It was intense, like a pain that wouldn't go away. Grievous felt slighted by whatever it was, because he wanted to be the best warrior as possible. So his shuttle carried him from Geonosis back to his lair on Vissac. Again, when he arrived, the medical droids wouldn't give him any new diagnoses. He was perfectly fine, and the doctor suggested that he avoid any unnecessary changes to his armor. His body was still struggling a little to adjust to the transformation, and it could prohibit him from developing in his new armor. The sensation, as Grievous referred to it by, would remain, despite his requests for it to be removed. The droid general, as a result, returned to his training. Dooku had provided him necessary exercises to complete, so that he could be an efficient Jedi hunter. Magna Guards assisted him with this training regimen. Grievous used 2 lightsabers, provided by Tyrannus, as gifts for his loyalty to their new regime. Sabers and staves collided inside the training hall. Grievous never killed his Magna Guards, but he dealt with them respectively, until all of his frustration, building for weeks over his tingling, released. He shoved his sabers behind his back and countered aggressively. The Magna Guard swung its staff downwards, and with the swift move of his wrist, the droid was launched through the training hall. Grievous watched the droid's head hit the wall and split into pieces, before slumping over. His eyes moved from the destruction to his hand, and wondered where that came from. Grievous had been dealing with the tension building inside of his hands for weeks, and it was tolerable at first, but with continued training regimens and exercises, it eventually became too much for him to deal with. It brought him anger, and he utilized it in that moment. He raised his hand and examined it, reaching forward and attempting to grab something far from arm's reach. He couldn't. Impatience again got the best of him, and in feeling so impatient, he utilized the dark side to lift the staff off of the dead guard. The weapon raised slightly off the ground, and he concentrated more. It felt like lifting 100 boulders with a pinky. Grievous tightened his grip on the weapon before it shattered into a million tiny pieces. His head cocked to the side, and he stepped towards both objects of destruction. In his mind, he realized the significance of this moment. He could entirely change his life for the better, with the correct manipulation of the sensation. He knew about the Force and so forth, but he also didn't have the wherewithal to call this that. Grievous had no intention to reveal this information to Tyrannus either. Instead, it would sit within his mind as he left his home world on Vasek to begin the besieging of Republic worlds with the droid armies. His position as general of the droid armies permitted him the chance to utilize the Force in ways he never thought possible. This isn't due to some regimental training, it was all in his rage. Grievous was encouraged to be angry because it was his only way of accessing his powers. He funneled that rage into his soul and slowly became more adept with every use of it. Every major loss of life he inflicted on the galaxy, he grew in strength. The droid general slaughtered clones, citizens, and militias. Fleet battles were won in hours, especially in the early war, and the Republic failed to find an appropriate counter to his attacks. This was perhaps the best time in the war to beat Grievous, because every battle came with no survivors, so no one knew he even existed. The Republic simply knew that an individual army and fleet was crushing through defense lines and new military counters unlike anyone else. Grievous was an unstoppable force, and his legendary collection began during that time. Every Jedi that came within his vicinity would meet their end with the clashing of sabers. But what Grievous realized was the benefit of his newly gained powers. The cybernetic enhancements implanted into his head gave him the ability to read every single lightsaber form during a duel. Basically, General Grievous knew all 7 lightsaber forms because of it. He could perfectly counter any Jedi that attacked him. The cybernetics were the base. The intuition became the final touch from the sensation. What the Force provided him that his cybernetics couldn't was a response, a quicker pathway to victory. Like any droid in the CIS military, their cybernetics were programmed for results. So was Grievous. The result simply had to be victory. So in some circumstances, especially with duos or trios of Jedi that came across him, Grievous could end fights easier by accessing different parts of his body in ways he never had before. In a duel, he could use 2 lightsabers and his cybernetics would win in the battle, or he could rely on the Force, his intuition, which provided him counters that let him win faster. Crush someone's foot with his claws, choke someone with his third arm while fighting off his opponents. All of these were moves that Grievous would have learned at one point or another during the war, but having gained access to them so early aided his efficiency and his secrecy. A Jedi would have survived one of these duels and informed the Council about the technological terror, but with the Force as his new ally, the Jedi wouldn't learn about Grievous. That individual, the one who should have survived had Grievous not gained the Force, would be the first Jedi he killed in that duel. What General Grievous realized about himself was the power he gained from slaughter. So while Dooku gave him orders to lessen the impact of his battles, he rarely listened. Grievous would rather progress in his private learning than follow Dooku's instructions. Whenever he questioned about his continuous slaughter, Grievous simply informed Tyrannus that the local population refused to surrender, so he made an example of them. Despite the early weeks of the war providing Grievous with some more satisfactory results, all of that changed when he discovered a Jedi Holocron. Grievous's work was not limited to any specific target. He didn't specifically go after military units, he hit everything and anything. He didn't know it at the moment, but he was destined to be expendable. All of his actions were meant to turn him into the villain of an era of war. Without knowing this, and in the middle of his own quest for personal power, he sought victory unlike he ever had in his life before. With troop numbers growing every day for him, and losses meaning absolutely nothing, he pushed for more results. Those results impacted him personally more than they ever did for the Confederacy. When Grievous slaughtered a Jedi Master and a class of younglings just outside the Desum sector, just south of Kashyyyk, he gathered numerous Holocrons. These were the keys to progressing his training, and because he killed a class of Jedi, these instructions were very basic. Simple moves and concepts of the Force, or the sensation as he continued to call it. Most of the studies were based around telekinesis, something Grievous was already utilizing the most. Very infrequently did he outwardly use the Force in battle, like he did with the Magna Guard on Vasek. When frustrated, he could absolutely crush a battle droid with the clench of his fist, but that didn't apply to clone troopers, typically. General Grievous, after gathering these Holocrons, committed himself to understanding the Force. He recognized how far his power could take him. The Sith could simply be stepping stones for him. He had been grateful that they saved his life, but that did not make him a slave to their cause. He saw it beneficial to remain in alliance with them. He would not and did not sell his soul to them, because he was in this for the destruction of the Republic. As he trained with the Holocrons, he gained a more efficient use of the sensation. There was a part of him that resented using the Force. It was like stooping down to the level of the Jedi, but it was more efficient to utilize its powers than to neglect them, because the Jedi also used them. Grievous would still tragically lose the malevolence. It was a botched plan from the beginning. A vessel without a support fleet, let alone having an efficient fighter force. Pretty dumb. Like, the Sith really set him up for failure here, and that was the conclusion he came to. Dooku scolded him like a child, and he returned to his home world of Vasek to await further orders, while Tyrannus also leaked information about General Grievous's hideout, and the droid general would be found by two Jedi, Nadar Veb and Kit Fisto. Similarly, Nadar would die by Grievous's hands. However, the following duel with Kit Fisto would be much different. The Jedi Master's use of Form 1 was expert. It was unlike anything Grievous had seen from a Jedi, but that did not make him unstoppable. The cybernetics made fighting a Form 1 Jedi Master challenging, but they couldn't anticipate the jarring and erratic moves that came along with Form 1 itself. However, Grievous's connection to the Force, which had grown in the months since finding the Holocrons, allowed him to foresee Kit Fisto's moves before they ever happened. With 4 lightsabers at his disposal, he would slaughter the Natalan Jedi Master and send his head back to Coruscant for the Council to see. The Malevolence incident, and the infiltration on Vasek, became an instantly recognizable attack from his master. Grievous understood that the Sith demanded loyalty from each other. Tyrannus frequently showed this off with Ventress, but Grievous couldn't help but see how insignificant these droid armies were under the control of an oligarch and of a shadow. Sidious never showed himself, and when he did, he had a disappointed scowl, and Tyrannus only ever stuck to the CIS Parliament and gave out orders that worked half the time. Having experienced frustration because of his master's failure to act, and ability to waste resources like the Malevolence, Grievous started to scheme. That intuition, that tick inside of his head from the Force itself, made him either paranoid or intelligent enough to realize what was happening here. He was being set up for something. It was too early into the war to tell what that was, but he believed it to be impure. A sign of betrayal was enough to create paranoia. It would have been simpler to be a mindless conqueror. But when such a conquest is at another's request, are you anything but simply a mindless cur anyways? Grievous had to toil with this, because right now, he felt like nothing but a piece of a system designed for a day he would not see. The Force opened his eyes, not just to the realm of a more efficient combatant role, but to the galaxy around him, one that so frequently seemed willing to stab him in the back. The Republic could hate him, but allies from within were his problem. Being that Grievous would, in the coming months, receive the first super tactical droid, he would start his scheming now. At the end of the first year of combat, Grievous had combined everything he knew from Tyrannus and the Jedi Holocrons. His collection of information was actually, at this point, larger than his collection of lightsabers. Inside his new lair, far away from Visak, he'd actually study religiously. In an effort to reduce suspicions, the Holocrons were hidden within the same tables that carried and displayed all the lightsabers he captured. So whenever Dooku visited him, he wouldn't ever know what Grievous was up to. Their relationship wasn't strained. They continued to operate and function normally. It was just the fact that Grievous was growing in power, secretly. When in person, around each other, Dooku could sense the change, but he didn't believe it to be possible for someone without any skin to use the Force. So, he ignored it. This wasn't even ignorance or arrogance, it was pure disbelief. There hadn't been a soul that was all robotic and cybernetic pieces, capable of using the Force to a greater extent than just harboring it itself. So, Dooku didn't care. Grievous was not a threat to him as a result. Instead, what remained Tyrannus' focus was maintaining the war effort. Grievous understood from a certain point of view that he was being underestimated, and that put him into a very strong position. With his new super tactical droid, he gained more information, locations of reserve fleets, understanding of contingency plans, and a wider grasp of the galaxy. What truly became the most identifiable aspect about Grievous' life after gaining the Force was his inability to rest. He couldn't just stop for a moment. His mind was always so preoccupied by the moment. The intuition was both a gift and a curse, because he couldn't escape what constantly bugged him. Without the Force, his mind would have been so preoccupied by victory that nothing could have snuck into his brain. But there was nothing stopping that this time. He couldn't resist the pull of the sensation. The Force was inside of his mind, growing and expanding, and despite having such a limited connection to his powers, he started making modifications to change that. Through the Holocrons, he learned of metal and gears and tendons that could be used in conjunction with the Force. It was a way to mend his body to his natural state, a wound. Unlike the Lord of Hunger, Grievous didn't desire a lust for absorbing the Force or eating it. His constant state of existence was scheming. The Sith were not his allies, and with the discovery of the reserve forces and some other information displayed by a super tactical droid, he set into motion his own plans. Everything for the droid general came together at the same time. His realizations, planning, and training developed all together. New additions to his armor to make his use of the Force easier helped him unlock powers he never really believed were possible. Everything was going perfectly for him. He had not a problem for himself, and his failures after Kamino were pretty much non-existent. His duels, even with Obi-Wan Kenobi, left Obi-Wan without an arm, and no other Jedi had survived an encounter with him. It was the perfect moment. Everything was together, and at that instant, he changed the fate of the Confederacy and the galaxy for good. Grievous had become aware that Sidious and Tyrannus did not value his contributions. Their plans were always on something else. The fact that they kept secrets led to more distrust. The fact that Dooku willingly led the Separatists into battles they knew they were going to lose was something he couldn't live with. And something Tyrannus said also threw Grievous off. Something about continuing the war, elongating it, and the victory will eventually be his. This constant promise of eventually drove Grievous mad, but the droid general did not wish to confront the Sith on their own terms. If they were willing to cheat with the Republic, then they would do it in honorable combat. That is also to say that Grievous with the Force did not cheat to win battles. He never relied on his guards with the Force, and he never lost to any opponent. The Force made him an unstoppable foe. So in the warrior way of knowing that one's opponent would cheat, he decided to play their game. It wasn't something to be overly proud of, but this was the price of war. Grievous, in the span of a few days, took control over the entire droid army, bombarded Dooku instead of Castle Sereno, slaughtered the Separatist Council, and held the Confederacy government hostage under his new leadership. Grievous, despite his lack of political savviness, knew that the key to maintaining this war was the government. Now, they were the government that Dooku promised them they would be. Without the CIS War Council, this confederacy was a legitimate government, rather than a direct copy of the Republic. Grievous promised them the victory they desired, if they guaranteed one thing: loyalty to him. This wasn't even Grievous telling them that he wanted to be Emperor. This was him expressing bluntly that he was tired of working with backstabbers like Dooku. It was pretty tragic for Tyrannus too, because he hadn't really done anything deserving of his death. But the Force made Grievous paranoid. He picked up on sensations that he could not describe. The Sith would have thrown him to the dogs, but there were no signs of that at any moment in the past year. However, it should be said that Grievous likely wouldn't have gone down this path if he had allowed Dooku to train him in the Force. Because of all his own personal training done by himself, it was skewed. He took basic formulas taught by the Jedi, mixed it with his rage, and created an entirely new perspective on the Force. It was likely similar to some old-age Sith long ago, but in the modern era, it was pretty unique. Grievous's quick and hostile takeover of the Confederacy was a huge problem for Sidious. The most powerful army in galactic history was now under the control of a paranoid cybernetic freak, and there was only one way to deal with it: take Grievous out himself. Sidious typically would avoid this type of thing, because the risk wasn't worth it, but Grievous was a simple battle droid, one that could be dealt with alone, without problem. As Grievous started his new campaign against the Republic, with the full backing of the Separatist government, he set up shop in a new undisclosed location. His home base wasn't need to know by anyone, and he anticipated an attack from Sidious. Grievous knew that the Sith Lord was still alive, but where remained the illusion. This would be the beginning of Grievous's night terrors. When he was a Kalesh warrior, he had dreams, as most sentient beings do. When he became General Grievous, those dreams stopped completely. He didn't really even sleep. He would just shut down and basically recharge, so dreams weren't something he had. Following Dooku's surprise death, he started having visions. To Grievous, these were just regular old dreams, but they were far more in-depth than dreams ever were. These visions were terrifying though. He hadn't felt true fear in his lifetime. As a warrior, that was never his place. Fear was weakness, so he always tried to conquer it with brute force. These visions brought out something else though. He could see Sidious, lurking around him like a predator. He felt his body lose control. He could sense darkness unlike ever before. There was a terror when it came to facing Palpatine. He was a monstrous opponent, an individual that struck without mercy, someone who tormented for enjoyment, and while Grievous was no different in many ways, this foe was more powerful than Dooku ever was. And because Grievous couldn't just detonate Sidious's lair, due to not knowing its location, he reasonably became more paranoid and prepared even more. That was Grievous's continuous curse with the Force. He couldn't slow his mind down from creating problems that may or may not exist. The true saving grace for Grievous was his aggressive strategy. Even though Sidious was actively hunting him, Palpatine couldn't afford to be away from the Senate for too long. Without control over the droid armies, he could not activate Order 99, and he was unable to find Grievous, who moved around frequently. This was also in part to Grievous's paranoia. He'd show himself at multiple battlefronts in the same span of 24 hours, so no one knew where he really was. Grievous's true blitz, as he called it, was an unstoppable movement. The Jedi couldn't counter it, the clones didn't have the forces to slow it down, and no one had the capability to prepare for it. The blitz was overwhelming, and it was designed to be that way. The droid army had the starting military force, which outnumbered the Republic anyways, and it activated the reserve force, nearly tripling their numbers overnight. It was an unbelievable show of force. Grievous was now the conqueror, but his work was unfinished. He still had more to complete, and that's how he defined himself. Sidious was left with frustration because his plan was being undone, actively, by the droid general. And yes, Palpatine had a contingency to kill Grievous. It was a switch inside of his head that could be alerted if Grievous went too far. Only problem is that it was destroyed when Dooku's castle was glassed from orbit. The Confederacy was also a problem. Grievous unintentionally made everything infinitely more difficult for the Sith plan. Without the command council, Sidious couldn't get an in. All the droid control facilities were wiped out by Grievous in the same go as Dooku. So Sidious had no edge. He couldn't rely on the government or the council to betray him, and he needed the Jedi to find him. But that created another massive problem. Every Jedi sent into his hands were murdered. None of them stood a chance. They were slaughtered. Duos, trios, teams of 4, 5, and 6 Jedi killed all at once. These weren't even low-level knights either. Most of them were Jedi Masters. Grievous simply became too unstoppable for his own good. Clone commando squads were frequently gutted and placed on pikes just to show the cost of sneaking around behind enemy lines. Grievous got so aggressive that he just killed off the entire Hux population, the rivals of the war that turned him into this cybernetic mess. Where Nihilus hungered for the Force, Grievous hungered for victory. He was the Lord of Triumph, a title that in any singular instance could forever be removed from history. Sidious wanted to be the architect of that title's destruction. 3 months into Grievous's reign, the galaxy was slipping. After an insurmountable Republic force was clobbered by a weaker Separatist fleet under the command of Trench and Grievous, the Republic blockaded the core and left everyone else to dry. Grievous may have been cruel, but he was working with the government now, so he offered every abandoned planet, not within the neutral systems, the chance to join the Confederacy. The CIS government made a deal with him that he could not attack neutral systems, and he reluctantly agreed. Part of this came from his paranoia. Without his paranoia of Sidious attacking him, he likely wouldn't have agreed to this. Grievous understood that it'd be more effective to have the government on his side, because his aspirations were domination, not political rule. If he were emperor, he would absolutely have power, but he'd be ineffective at triumph in such a position. His rule might last forever, but it wouldn't be worthwhile. A pursuit of political ambition in his mind would only tarnish his legacy. His focus remained on battlefronts. Republic cruisers crumbled under his watch, clones surrendered and were executed by his command, and the Jedi were slaughtered by his own hand. Sidious himself finally showed his face though. After trailing Grievous for the past 3 months, he caught up to him. It was easy once the Republic became surrounded inside the core. Grievous was the warrior, the victor of the Clone War, but ever since Dooku's defeat, Sidious had trained for this moment, just to ensure he found victory. Before Palpatine arrived in Grievous's camp, the droid general was finalizing his attack plan. Instead of staging various campaigns on different core worlds, they would attack all at once, cripple their defense fleets, and push for the center of the core as fast as possible. This true blitz was designed to cripple the Republic immediately. Sidious could stop it all with 1 kill. Well, he hoped to at least. The Sith Lord slipped down, past the main Separatist fleet, onto a system covered in darkness. It wasn't covered in darkness because it was nighttime, it was because it was scorched earth. The planet of Giju had been mutilated by the Separatists, due to a resistance force, unwilling to surrender. Grievous set up his own camp on the surface to oversee the last stages of the campaign. Droid forces were killing off the rebels and surviving clones at this very moment. Grievous was inside of a small fort, erected during the siege. He paced across the wet and muddy surface, instructing his super tactical droid to prep forces for another campaign. Grievous wanted to see the Outer Rim fall, so that his great conquest could be finalized in one true, united victory. The Sith Lord leapt over the walls of the fort with ease, and moved through it. Grievous felt his arrival immediately, instructing his guards to leave him, and setting into action his own plan. Grievous continued speaking to the tactical droid over the hologram, until his opponent finally arrived, igniting a crimson saber and raising it to his chest. Grievous turned around and paced to the side, telling Sidious that they could fight on even terms in a one-on-one duel, or he could be mutilated for fighting dishonorably. Sidious looked around, seeing nothing and no one, but the bones of the tent-like structure they stood under. Grievous had nothing on him, nothing that could save him. Sidious never planned on fighting fairly, and he communicated that here. Sidious readied his 2 sabers and prepared for the duel. The 2 opponents sized each other up. Sidious knew everything about Grievous's fighting style, how his cybernetics worked, and how aggressive his impatience could be. Dooku told him all of those secrets, but Tyrannus had not trained Grievous since he gained the Force. These reports were all old news, and Sidious only believed that Grievous was maddened with power. He never considered Grievous finding a semblance of understanding about the Sith plan, so he started the attack by raising his hand to choke Grievous's lungs, but it didn't work. Instead, he started the duel, underestimating his opponent immediately. Their blades clashed in the middle of the structure. They started with lightsaber combat specifically, and Sidious didn't even activate his second saber. He may have trained for this, but he did not fear his opponent, even though he couldn't crush him with the Force. Grievous shoved Sidious backwards and stepped away, as Palpatine swung where Grievous would have been. their weapons collided more, sliding in the jabs and staggering away. They circled each other before Grievous lunged in, using his claws to hold onto the wet ground, as Sidious's boots slipped and slid. He avoided with ease though, attempting to catch Grievous's back, but a third saber ignited, defending him, a move he made intentionally to surprise Sidious. The Sith Lord batted upwards, and Grievous raised his fourth hand and blasted from it electricity. It blinded Palpatine, launching him from his feet. Grievous retracted his 2 extra arms, leaving him with only 2 activated sabers as he coughed, watching Sidious push his hands deeper into the mud and wipe his face with his sleeve. He wanted to know how that was possible. Why couldn't he kill him with the Force, but Grievous could use it? So, instead of coming to a conclusion, 2 crimson lightsabers ignited, and he rose to his feet. Grievous laughed, finally calling Sidious a true challenger. The Sith Lord leapt into the air and swung down. Their weapons beat on the others. Grievous balanced perfectly in the muddy soil, and Sidious flexibly avoided strikes. His body maneuvered and contorted to avoid strikes. He switched forms to throw off Grievous's cybernetics, but nothing worked. The droid general didn't bat an eye or even lose his footing. He parried and stepped away, wherever he needed to. The Sith Lord was left to make up room for himself. With the Force, Sidious fired electricity, hoping to burn through his opponent's robotic body, but Grievous blocked it with his saber and moved in. The charge caught Sidious off guard, and he pulled away, swiping his sabers into defense, while Grievous, who had mastered every single saber form with his cybernetic enhancements, bashed down, flipping forms as necessary. They each gave the other a challenge, nothing stopping either of them, and they only pressed against each other more, hoping that they would come out on top. Sidious was furious beyond belief, as he struggled to remain sturdy with his footing. He leapt onto the command table and fought Grievous from above, giving him a chance to find his footing, as the Dread General eventually got tired of the ruse and launched his foot forward. With the force and the impact of his claw, the table shattered down the middle, and Sidious fell, but landed upright, just in time to parry Grievous's attack. The mix of cybernetics and the sensation were useful, but Sidious always found a way. As Grievous broke through Palpatine's defenses, the Sith Lord pulled his sabers back, utilizing Trikata and countering Grievous by slashing his sabers across his abdomen. The droid general tumbled over in agony, but the rage, the power, the Force only ever being channeled through him with the darkness gave him strength. His third saber activated over his head, enough of a defense to save him from the strike that followed. Palpatine almost won. Grievous looked into Palpatine's eyes and promised the Sith Lord an agonizing death. With sparks flashing from his new wound, Grievous swept his fourth saber into action and shoved upwards. Those same bones that were across the structure of the tent transformed. Magna Guards had been placed inside the structure, hidden on the walls. They came to life, igniting their staffs before Palpatine could ever react to seeing them. They stabbed him in the back and electricity shot up his body. Grievous rose to his feet and told Sidious they could have had an even exchange, an honorable battle. His saber bashed down. He told Palpatine that they could have fought as warriors, but his Sith ways prevented him from an honorable death. Grievous's abdomen shot with more flashes as he swept his sabers back and forth against Sidious's defense. The Sith Lord tried to cut the Magna Guards down, but there were too many weapons surrounding him. He pushed back, using everything he could to survive this. He even attempted to use the Force to leap out of the circle of death, but Grievous used the Force to drag him down into the mud again. The coward, the tragedy of Darth Sidious the Cowardice, was written by a conqueror, a victor, a warrior. Grievous kicked his foot forward, knocking Sidious's hood off of his head and sending blood from his skin. Grievous's claw stomped down through his opponent's abdomen, and the Magna droids shocked Palpatine again. Grievous, still connected, reveled in the pain as it shot up into his body too. He laughed maniacally as Sidious watched what he created shove his claw deeper into his own body. Grievous's other claw landed on Palpatine's chest and crushed through every muscle, bone, and organ in the way, but specifically avoided the Sith Lord's cold heart. All Palpatine could do was watch. Without his vertebrae, he couldn't move. Grievous towered over him. A warrior that would have been a coward without the Force showed the Sith Lord the cost of treachery, and that of cheating in a fair battle. The warriors around the room watched Grievous claim his victory, and he gave out the order to have the Republic destroyed. It would be like one sweep, like a door opening. The Separatists would rinse the Republic. Battle after battle, assault after assault. There was nothing the Republic could do at this point. except to watch and pray that Grievous would give them mercy. The droid armies didn't even need to deploy on any surfaces. A simple bombardment of every population center would see the core surrendering. The Senate would face the wrath of their continued war effort, and their representatives, not all of them, but most of them, would lose their lives too. All of those who continuously petitioned for more war would be killed off first. The Jedi Order would face a similar wrath. Grievous couldn't kill everyone, but he could instill fear into them. The fall of the Jedi and the Republic ended the war. Grievous then moved on to begin his own personal campaign against the Outer Rim, as he delved further into the Force. His duel with Sidious remained the most challenging and grueling contest in his life. Palpatine should have won, and he nearly did by using Dragata. By having any knowledge on Grievous's powers, though, Sidious would have stood a better chance, with preparation, and Grievous knew that, so he went out of his way to avoid ever having a chance to lose again. His battle with Palpatine humbled him, in a way, more than it emboldened him. One cheap move could have ended it all, and it nearly did. So Grievous conquered. He won more territory and trophies for the Confederacy, and he moved on to the next location. The Hutts, Black Suns, Zygerians, and Pikes were no match for him. The CIS couldn't really even be mad at him either. He was freeing up new territory to fall under their banner. The neutral systems, which had done a fine job at remaining neutral, became a powerful ally for the rising CIS. The Jedi survivors would remain enemies to Grievous's existence, even though he technically freed the Outer Rim from abuse and saved the galaxy from the Sith and the Republic. The Confederacy had a lot of work to undergo, but without the CIS Council, thanks to Grievous, they wouldn't have any rich megacorporations breathing down their necks for paydays. What inevitably became the case that surprised Grievous were those who clung to him. Jedi who became disillusioned with the Standing Order searched for Grievous to learn from him, to join his quest. Grievous didn't understand the Force, aside from his skewed perspective, but this would lead to individuals like Lin, Balin, Barriss, Viola, and a few others to join his side. This became a dark adept Force sect, but one that didn't really even practice the Force. They were beneficiaries of his power, but their focus was solely on saber and on combat. Because the peace-loving Republic senators and systems were welcomed into the Confederacy, there wouldn't be very many vengeful Jedi or Force adepts in the galaxy to chase after Grievous. Without Dooku leading the Confederacy, it would become the government he originally hoped for it to be. The Sith were the problem, and Grievous, despite being a warlord, had fulfilled Dooku's original desires. The Sith and the Jedi were pretty much all gone. Grievous had a group of loyalists, which he found a little bit weird, and he also had himself a fine retirement, a return to his home world, to his people, without the oppression of the Hutt or any other group in the galaxy. As Grievous's legacy became a staple in the history of the galaxy, as the great Kalesh warrior, General Grievous, the conqueror of oppression, a hero. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So this one borders between the Grievous finding the Separatist Reserve Fleet and Grievous becoming Emperor, and also kind of the Rebellion one. This is like a middle ground between all three of those. I wanted the Paranoia to be the weird takeaway from this, is that I think someone of Grievous's power and capability, I feel like he might actually become really paranoid by having a connection to the Force, and that might humble him in a way. And that I thought would be a very interesting direction to take Grievous in the story, is someone that's conquering, and he's conquering for himself, but he starts becoming more and more paranoid as the story goes on. And I think without having killed Sidious originally, he would be paranoid, because Sidious is his greatest threat. In this specific story, I don't really see the Jedi having a chance to catch him. I think after he because he kind of does, he kind of just brings balance to the galaxy by ending the war, by ending the Republic, by taking out the Sith. I think at a certain point, Jedi would stop trying to hunt him, and those that did end up finding him would join him. I thought that'd be kind of interesting. I think this dark adept group becomes more like a Night Sister sect, where it's not really fully imbued in the dark side. It's just like a group of people that like to hang out. That's really it. They just like to hang out with each other, they're bros. As for Grievous with the Force itself, aside from giving him paranoia, I thought it'd be really interesting to make a lot of his powers subtle. I know the original What If I did back in the day before I realized that I could do a what if and actually change things. I didn't really do much with that original one, and with this one I wanted it to be a lot of subtle work. Like obviously using lightning and having a metal that's conductive on his body would be really interesting, and that's why it's used against Palpatine, but I think most of the time he wouldn't really use it. I think a lot of Grievous's use of the Force, or as he calls it, the sensation, would be mental, and I thought that'd be really interesting to take for him, because it would be very easy to just turn him into Malgus and be like, this guy is John Malgus, like that, a little predictable in my opinion. And so I thought making it internal made him a lot more interesting and also sympathetic as a character, because he develops not a love for the galaxy, but a understanding of it, an understanding of why the Sith are bad, and he's like, well, if I can get rid of them and the Republic, I can just go hang out with the people on Kaylee, because the Hawk are dead. So, you know, it's a neutral story. I think it's a neutral, light story, but I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.